We anticipate in the next 10 to 12 years, approximately 8 to 6 million Hispanics coming into the United States and 41 million Asians. You have been the majority minority for 400 years in this country. You have been the number 2 population for 400 years. You're going to get kicked out of being number 2. You're going to go down and become number 4. Now, common sense, even a 3rd grade education would tell you, if you didn't get anything when you were number 2, you all jumped ahead of me, but anyway, you can guess what you're going to get when you become number 4.
President Biden, do you support reparations?
Well, let me, since I haven't spoken on this, get a chance. Number one, the reason we're the country we are is because of immigration. We've been able to cherry pick the best from every single continent. The people who come here have determination, resilience. They are ready to stand up and work like the devil. We have 24 out of 100 children in our school today is Hispanic. The idea that we are going to walk away and not provide every opportunity for them is that not only stupid and immoral, but it's bad for America. They are the future of America.
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. And this is what we are faced with. And this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington, in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
We are owed $104 trillion on the very low end, plus $735 billion recurring. This number does not include the cost of about 50 Black Wall Streets that were decimated, nor compound interest from 2017 when Sean D. Rochester's book, The Black Tax, was published, nor the cost of Black life, nor the cost of living increases, nor the war on drugs, nor the current day pandemic. The number I'm working with is for slavery, Jim Crow, and accrued ongoing systemic racism, oppression, and disadvantage in the country our ancestors built with their lives. What's up, fam? Thank you so much for joining me live. This is the California Reparations Task Force. We're back with gentrification and entertainment today. Now, listen, family, I am back and forth. Okay, I'm back and forth between court. So I'm managing from a few places today, but I'm so glad you're here. We're about to get started. If you do not hear my public comments, I will do my best to record them and then share them at the end of the first half of this segment, okay? That's what I'm going to do for y'all, family. Yes, Kelly, I see you laughing at me, fam. What's up, Kelly Pryor? I see you, United States Atlantic Creole Nationalist Party. Welcome, one and all. And for those of you in Twitter and Facebook, I cannot see you. So if you want to chat with us live today, please log into the Reparationist Perspective channel on ScrewTube. Yes, family. Anyway, you know, the movement takes catnaps. So here I am doing my part to bring all the events to you live. Stand by. Let me share my screen. Once again, if you don't hear my comments because I cannot share my mic on the Blue Jeans app while being live in this space, I will recite them or record them for the end of this day, okay? Stand by.
Today is Tuesday, December 9th, and the time is 9:01. The AB 3121 Task Force meeting is now called to order. Good morning. My name is Camila Moore, and I am the chair of the task force. Before we begin, let us have the staff do a roll call for attendance and establishing whether we have a quorum. Parliamentarian Johnson?
Yes, thank you. Chair Moore? Vice Chair Brown? Vice Chair Brown?
Present.
Member Bradford? Member Grills?
Present.
Member Holder?
Present.
Member Jones Sawyer? Member Scott Lewis?
Present.
Member Tamaki?
Present.
And Member Montgomery Stepp?
Present.
And I will call again Member Jones Sawyer? And Member Bradford? Madam Chair, there are 9 task force members, and the number needed for a quorum is 5. The number present is 7. Madam Chair, a quorum has been established.
Thank you, Parliamentarian Johnson. Members of the task force and members of the public, welcome to the AB 3121 Reparations Task Force December hearing. The task force scopes and powers are predicated on AB 3121, a legislative bill authored by California Secretary of State Shirley Weber and signed into law by California Governor Gavin Newsom in September 2020. The law requires the 9-member task force to examine slavery that existed in the United States, discrimination in the public and private sectors against those who were enslaved and their descendants, and the lingering negative effects of the institution of slavery. The law requires the task force to recommend how California will issue a formal apology, how to eliminate discrimination in existing state laws, and how to establish new programs, policies, or projects to address the group's findings. The task force will also determine how any potential compensation should be calculated and who would be eligible, as well as additional forms of rehabilitation or restitution. Today is our last meeting of the year. We've been meeting since June of 2021. We held our first substantive hearing on September 23rd and September 24th, where we discussed the transatlantic slave trade, the institution of slavery, and the impetus and implications of the Great Migrations. Our second substantive hearing occurred on Tuesday and Wednesday, October 12th and 13th, where we discussed more contemporary harms against Black Americans, including in housing and education segregation, environmental racism, racism in banking, tax, and labor, and the racial wealth gap. Today, we will focus on topics concerning infrastructure, gentrification, and homelessness, and we will continue our conversation around the community of eligibility. And tomorrow, we will have a panel on entertainment, arts, and culture. Without further ado, I would like to turn to item number 2 on our agenda, which is the public comment period. And I will now recognize Ms. Aisha Martin-Walton. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Moore and task force members and the public. My name is Aisha Martin-Walton. I'm with the Department of Justice, and we are now moving to public comment. Public comment will be for 1 hour. Each individual is limited to 3 minutes for public comment. In the community to make comments in the future. You may also submit written comments at any time via email at reparationstaskforce@doj.ca.gov. To participate in public comment today, please use the raised hand function. You can find that button on the upper right-hand side of the screen on the sidebar. There's the shape of a hand. Once you click on that, it will prompt a raised hands feature. On our end, we will accept your raised hand. You will have to click continue. And once you are accepted and brought into the meeting as a presenter, you'll be automatically unmuted. Once it is your turn to comment, you will be unmuted and you'll have 3 minutes. At the end of your comment period, you will be again muted and drop back down to attendee. We will accept the raise hand features as they come in. Once the person in front of you is done speaking, Greene Hurtado, also with DOJ, will say your name and prompt you, and you may begin speaking. Please note there's about a 20-second delay between the attendee and presenter mode. So please keep that in mind as you are being promoted to presenter and begin speaking. Okay, we will begin. Trini, do we have a first commenter?
Yes, our first commenter is Angela Nirvana. Angela, you've been unmuted. Please begin speaking.
How to gentrify freedmen from the state of California. Fugitive Slave Act, land theft, lack of business loans, the war on drugs while giving the opioid addicted resources, the war on poverty, which leads to Black on Black crime and murder, redlining into environmentally racist communities and tenement housing, the weaponization of immigration against freedmen to neutralize us economically, and now to neutralize our vote, preschool to prison pipeline, private prison industrial complex, foster care after the government successfully tears the Black family apart with the aforementioned, giving away our reparations and protections to refugees, immigrants, illegals, and LGBTQIA, while freedmen are being slaughtered by the KKK that are being hired in the police forces throughout the country, then emboldening the race soldiers with more of our tax dollars to gentrify us out of our communities, overpaying us the reparations we are long overdue, and putting an end to qualified immunity. Removing freedmen teachers from the classroom, siphoning public school dollars from the Black community and using it to give a private school education to whites and immigrants whose median incomes range from $56,000 to $97,000. Make Prop 209 law to take away our affirmative action while implementing Spanish as a necessity for a job interview, knowing freedmen don't have social capital at the hiring tables, nor the complexion for the protection to secure the job, even if they speak Spanish as fluently as Pedro. Lab manufacture pandemics, then vaccine mandates to force us out of education and the few jobs we possess. 12.3% unemployment rate, 45,000 median income in a state where the median home price is $750,000. And how can we benefit from the equity that's accrued if we're fortunate enough to own a home with this salary? We cannot. Masking the failure of freedmen by a government who allows descendants of slave traders with money into the country and making them more American than freedmen with our affirmative action, just to name a few. I want to thank you in advance, Task Force, for ensuring our reparations is far more robust than the housing voucher issued in Evanston, Illinois. I want to thank you in advance for understanding that freedmen have been legislated to the bottom of this Titanic as the anchor of this country's capitalism, and therefore are the only group owed reparations. Freedmen, this ain't your fault, but it is if you don't fight back. Do not fail our children like the government at every branch has failed us. Thank you for allowing me to share.
Thank you, Ms. Nirvana, for your comments. Trini, do we have another public speaker?
Yes, our next speaker is Friday Jones. You've been unmuted.
Hey, good morning. Oh, unmute.
Yes, you're fine. We can hear you.
Perfect. Good morning, task force members. Happy, what in the month is this? November, December. Anyway, morning. Oh, unmute.
Yes, you're fine. We can hear you.
Perfect. Good morning, task force members. Happy, what in the month is this? November, December. Anyway, my name is Friday Jones, or I am Friday Jones, and my name is Consa Jones Muhammad. I am a city commissioner for Mayor Garcetti's Los Angeles Reparations Task Force. I'm the co-chair of the National Assembly of American Slavery Descendants in the Los Angeles chapter, and our chapter is a member of the Coalition for a Just and Equitable California, known as CJEC. And this morning, I am sounding the clarion call. Texas Congressional Member Chip Roy's HR 3163, Combating Racist Teaching in Schools Act, would prohibit federal funds from going to any elementary, secondary school, or college that promotes race-based ideologies. This is recreating the dumbing down of America that has McGraw-Hill's fourth grade elementary book, California Changing State Impact Social Studies, that has an enslaved Black man under a heading that reads, "The Gold Rush Brought a Diverse Population to California." It does not mention slavery at all. Gavin Newsom signed AB 101, the first state in the nation that requires high schools to include ethnic studies in their curriculum just this year. That was created by now Assembly Member Weber, who also wrote the legislation for this task force. White supremacy has an entire government that allows laws like this to be drafted without the health of the nation, let alone the health and the well-being of the descendants of U.S. chattel slavery from being considered. On the latest episode of Politics and Black, entitled The Case for Lineage Reparations, and thank you, Don Tamaki, for being part of that show and sharing your personal story, John Tatiishi shared that he learned about his parents' internment in Japanese war camps during his college education. This bill is an assault to the American people and is intended to uphold white supremacy. Joseph Ryan, a California attorney, should also be disbarred for filing a frivolous lawsuit to stop the transfer of Bruce's beach to the Bruce family. His lawsuit, like Representative Chip Roy's bill, is an attempt to undermine Supervisor Hahn's creation of a blueprint that other local governments can follow. Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas, whose family is from Halifax, North Carolina, the same county that my family is from, where the Black Cottons with an E-N are buried in Mary's Chapel in Scotland Neck. They're buried alongside my ancestors. He has drafted S96, which has companion bill HR 3134, combating racist training in the military Act for 2021 to prevent
Jones,
American
I'm
history
so
from
sorry
being
to
taught
have
to
to cut
service
you off
members. These
in the
laws are an
middle of your
abomination
sentence,
and they go
but
against
your
our
time
First
has
Amendment
expired,
rights.
Ms.
Thank you
Jones.
so much.
All
Appreciate
right.
you all.
Thank you. Okay, Trini, next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is Jelani Traxler. You have been unmuted. You may now speak.
Yes, thank you all for y'all work and what y'all doing. I've been following this since really prior to y'all first meeting in June. I'm living in Atlanta, Georgia, and this is considered like Chocolate City, but there's like no real robust reparations programs or just strategy in a city that's predominantly Black. So I was just wondering, more of a question, how to get basically what y'all doing in California and what's happening in Illinois kind of carbon copy in this space, because it's just, I don't know, like, and it hasn't really been on any of the local politicians' agendas or really spoken about really on a local and state level. Like, so that's really kind of where I guess my question more than a comment. So.
Mr. Traylor? Is it
Traxler?
Traxler? Hi, this is Aisha Martin Walton with the Department of Justice. The public comments will be noted and will be shared today with the task force members. And so we will take your comment and it'll be on file. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Yes. Outside of that, farming and the green justice movement, I see that, some of it's been a part of like reparations language, but I don't know how much like this is being correlated to, the effects of like global warming, the legacy of slavery and how it's not just impacted, the freeman people, Black descendants, but the planet itself, and the nature of the planet, and, essentially bearing the, social, emotional, spiritual damages of that. And then the economy reflecting something that does not care for the earth. I don't know if y'all have, more or less kind of bridged that gap of like the legacy of slavery and the legacy of climate change, basically, because if there's more connection to how a economy like this has shaped the world and left a negative impact, maybe there could be more of a bridging of, white people who may not see reparations as important, actually seeing it as important, because it's not just fixing a group of people, but helping to fix the planet too, and restore natural environments and habitats that were lost because of, slave policies driven for economic prosperity for, a handful of people. So yeah, that's really pretty much it. If y'all address that, that'd be great.
Thank you so much, Mr. Traxler, for your comments today. All right, Trini. Yes,
The next speaker is, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I got a note from Parliamentarian Johnson to recognize member Reggie Jones Sawyer. Thank you.
Welcome. Good morning. Okay. Do we have another speaker in the queue?
Yes, we do. The next speaker is Chris L. with CJEC. You've been unmuted. You may now begin speaking.
Hey, good morning, Chris Lobson. I am, of course, with the Coalition for Just and Equitable California, CJEC, here in California. I want to do a couple things, or three things, but I want to first just give you all some thanks. Really, this is the last meeting of the year. I want to thank you for your work this year. I want to thank you for your service. I want to thank you for your time and your commitment. I want to thank you for really what is a historic task. And I want to thank you for all of the real hard work that you've been putting in. These meetings, I know, are just, part of what you do, right? So I want to thank you. I also want to thank the folks who have been calling in, who have been tuning in, who are doing the live stream right now on ETM Media Group on YouTube. By the way, big shout out to the family there, live streaming this entire thing. I'm moderating comments there, so I'll see you there after this. And I also want to thank Don Tamaki for joining the Oakland, California reparations meeting that happened in, I believe it was last month. Great conversation. You can check out that live streamed or clipped video of that live stream on ETM Media Group on YouTube as well. And then I also want to invite you to this Saturday. There is another California reparations community meeting going on in LA this time, hosted by our LA group, NAASD LA, in conjunction with ETM Media and CJEC as well. That's this Saturday, December 11th, 12 p.m. It's in LA. Pull up if you can. I know Chair Moore is going to be there. Pull up if you can. And then last thing I'll say is just a couple of things. One, I know you're going to deal with the issue of the public chat function. Just my personal opinion that chat function come back on. Understanding, and hearing from folks directly, I think is an important thing. And then also, we're actually hearing from some people in our live stream chat right now that they're having trouble actually getting connected to the Blue Jeans comment and the Blue Jeans chat now. So if you could think about next year having a way for people to just call in, just like have a number for people to just call in without having to use the Blue Jeans app, that would expand people's ability to participate a lot. Thanks much and have a great day.
Thank you for your comment.
I mean, another speaker?
Yes, we do. The next speaker is Sharice. Sharice, you've been unmuted. You may now begin speaking.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you. Good morning to the commission and everyone who's listening. I just want to personally thank the commission for all your hard work. I do a lot of volunteer work, and I know sometimes a simple thank you can make the work a lot easier. And again, I just want to say thank you for all the work and efforts you've been putting in for this task force. I was super excited when AB 3121 was first passed last year because I said, finally, the nation is going to get an example of what reparations for descendants of American slavery is going to look like, and possible policies for other Black Americans. And some of my enthusiasm has been tapered the last couple of months just because the commission has not actually come to a determination of who is eligible for reparations, and because the DOJ, in my opinion, not really engaged the community and the public in a meaningful manner. I would love to not be disappointed where reparations is concerned. Last year I was part of an organization that met with Mayor Garcetti's office, and I was the one who actually presented to him or inquired and requested that he join a reparations coalition. And look what we have now. He's rolled out a commission in Los Angeles. I was not given an opportunity to even getting information about that or given a heads up about it, but kudos to them. And that was a little bit of a disappointment. But I would like to not be disappointed by this commission. And I really ask you to really go back and, look at the people who have helped to get this commission started, this task force started, see what their concerns are, and really, get to the point in who is eligible for reparations in the state of California. The world is looking at you. This will be a guideline for other states. And again, thank you so much for your hard work.
Sharice, thank you so much for your comments today.
The next speaker is Cash Gaines. Cash Gaines, you've been unmuted. You may now begin speaking. You have 3 minutes.
Yeah, thanks y'all for having me. Hugs to everyone on the panel and to Mr. Tamaki, a deep bow. I first want to say, reading from the newspaper article of 1865, when we were asked by the general of the Union Army, question number 3, state in what manner you think you can take care of yourselves. at the end of the Civil War, essentially, our answer was, and I quote, "The way we can best take care of ourselves is to have land and to turn it and till it by our own labor, that is by the labor of our women and children and old men, and we can soon maintain ourselves and have something to spare." I want to say that there's an article by the homelessvoice.org that says African Americans have the highest rate of homelessness in minorities for a decade running, and that California Matters.org has an article saying that Black people disproportionately homeless in California. So with all that in mind, and with me understanding that our ancestors wanted us to have land as a part of our reparations claim, indeed, that's the reason HR 40 is called HR 40. It's from 40 acres and a mule. And I'll shout out Gavin Newsom for returning Bruce's beach back to the family it's owed to. Essentially, what I've done is I've literally looked up how many acres are owned federally in California. Of the 100 million, it looks like 45 million are still owned by the federal government. If every Black American, assuming we're 2 million of the population, receives acres, that would be 22.5 acres if we split all that up. If two people who are Black American slave descendant get married, you would receive your 40 acres claim in America. And again, we're talking about climate change. We're the youth. We're talking about the same 2035 deadline that Gavin Newsom's talking about, that Joe Biden even is talking about. We want space on our land for solar panels, for supercharger stations, to bring us traffic to businesses that we would own, vertical farms, and to pair with businesses in California that are removing plastic from the Pacific Ocean so we can create sustainable housing for the homeless out there too. So please address homelessness by addressing our 40 acres claim. And the acres are there, as well as the industries that can help to support us in the next generation. Thank you guys again for the space and time. Peace and reparations.
Thank you, Mr. Gaines. Trini?
The next speaker is Marcus Champion. You've been unmuted. You may now speak. You have 3 minutes.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Marcus Champion. I'm a board member for NAASDLA, which is the National Assembly of American Slavery Descendants, Los Angeles, as well as a member of CJAC, a Coalition for a Just and Equitable California. I know this meeting is not about eligibility, but on our recent episode of Politics in Black, and I wanted to shout out all of the task force members who have appeared on our show, especially Don Tamaki, who was on our latest show. Also on that show, we had Dean Erwin Chemerinsky, who is the chair of law at UC Berkeley. Dean Chemerinsky is one of, if not the foremost professional of constitutional law in the country. And so on that show, we asked the dean about eligibility and whether this should be a lineage discussion or a race discussion. Dean Chemerinsky agreed with us that in order to tackle reparations and for it to not be challenged after the fact, this needs to be a lineage discussion. What the dean also said is that if this is solely about race, then that opens up to Prop 209 violations in California, as well as equal protection violations when you're talking about reparations broadly. So again, I know today is not about eligibility, but I would ask the task force to vehemently go after Dean Chemerinsky to speak as an expert when it comes to eligibility. When it comes to the rest of our Black brothers and sisters, this isn't about exclusion. This is about making sure that we win at the end of the day. One of my previous colleagues, Chris Lotchin, or was it Friday Jones, talked about John Tatishi also being on the show. And one thing that you find if you read the Handbook of Reparations, you find that there was a specific group that was named in Japanese internment in terms of eligibility. But there were also groups outside of that that had side cases and side lawsuits that were able to make their case as well. So when it comes to this discussion in California, when it comes to reparations in America, this is a lineage discussion about the African Americans who are descendants of persons enslaved in the United States, and all other cases, while they are valid, are separate cases. So again, I would ask the task force in future discussions to bring in Dean Erwin Chemerinsky. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Champion.
The next commenter is Chad Brown. Chad Brown, you've been unmuted. You may now speak. You have 3 minutes.
Hello, good morning, members of the task force. It's good to see you all again. Thank you once again for your time. I reiterate all the comments by my colleagues previously in our thanks and our appreciation for your time, hard work, and commitment all throughout this year, all throughout 2021. My colleague Marcus Champion from NAASD-LA just spoke. We also sit on the steering committee of Coalition for a Just and Equitable California. And quite frankly, he just stole my thunder. So I will reiterate really what he said. If you have not had a chance to view the last broadcast of Politics in Black with Dean Chemerinsky from UC Berkeley Law, I would encourage all of you, I strongly encourage all of you to please view that episode. Dean Chemerinsky, as you know, is one of our foremost legal or constitutional law scholars in the country. He has argued in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, and we engaged him to make sure that we were taking into consideration any legal ramifications here in the state of California and also broadly at the federal level with any reparations proposals or initiatives that come out of either this task force or out of Congress, whether that be with Bill H.R. 40 or executive order. So I just wanted to call in, and again, Marcus Champion really nailed it here. Just please take this into consideration. Again, understanding this meeting here is not about eligibility, but that is the overarching topic that really needs to be tackled, defined very clearly as you think about setting a template and a model for reparations at the federal level. So again, thank you again for your time, your commitment, your hard work. I'm wishing all of you a very happy holidays. Have a very happy new year. Have a great meeting today. I look forward to hearing the discussions today. We've been talking about it all week and we're all very excited. But please continue the hard work, and I look forward to continuing this with you in 2022. So have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Thanks so much for your comments today.
The next commenter is Michelle Harris Price. You have been unmuted. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I'm Michelle Harris Price, and I'm actually the co-chair of the San Diego Promise Zone Economic Activities Committee. And I would love to know how this was publicized, because I just learned about it like 20 minutes ago and jumped on because I got a text and thought this could not be happening live. And when I clicked through, I went through all the stuff to get here, and I'm really excited. I just want to add, I want to offer a couple of resources, and I'm not sure if you guys are, I'm not sure where this is or where we are in the process or anything, but in Detroit, my best friend is a PR pro, and they're doing something, there's something called Reparation Generation there. And I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that organization, but they are actually transferring $25,000 in for homeownership in Detroit. And that's the name of this program that they've created. And then there's a man named Sean Rochester who's done a talk at Google, and he calls it the Black Tax. And he's actually done a very good calculation of how to determine what reparations look like and how much it looks like. He's an economist, and he's done a lot of work towards this. So finally, I'd like to just say thank you so much for what you're doing, and I'm going to follow this work. I don't know. I'll see if there's a calendar invite or something. So thanks a lot for everything that you guys are doing.
Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Harris Price.
Okay, we have the next commenter is Harriet A. Barton. Ms. Barton, you've been unmuted. You have 3 minutes. You may begin speaking.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, task force. And I would just like to say that, yes, reparations is cash payments and specific policy for the harmed, which is descendants of chattel slavery. And also, I'd like to say that I wish that the panel could focus on the eligibility for Californians, because there could be Californians that have left in the last year or so because of employment issues, and also that were brought here as children and are here still struggling. So if they could address that, early on in the process. Okay. And also, there's lots of forms of discrimination, and in California especially, there is a problem with illegal immigration that affects descendants of slavery. I just feel that language being required for certain jobs, like speaking Spanish, that's a problem. I don't know how that's not a form of discrimination. And we're in California, we're by the border, and I just don't know why that has not been brought up in any of the meetings. No one has wanted to talk about that. I'm not sure. It's like the big elephant in the room that no one ever wants to talk about. And it does impact negatively Black Americans. It does. That's just a fact. And it has to be discussed at some point. So the eligibility definitely, I'd like to see you guys address and look at. And I noticed that also in the last meeting, there were people that were, I guess, invited speakers. A lot of people had issues with, I guess, land. Maybe they lost land or something. And I think that's an issue you need to have a lawyer for, because not all of us have lost land in California. I don't know if it's going to be based on having land lost or you had land in your family. This just should be based on the fact that you're discriminated, period. You're just discriminated against here. So if you could just address those issues, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Barton.
Our next speaker is Greg Pennington. Mr. Pennington, you've been unmuted. You have 3 minutes. You may begin speaking.
My name is Greg Pennington. I work with the San Francisco Black and Jewish Unity Coalition. I'm just sitting here typing furiously with all the great information, and I just wanted to make you aware of our body. We are definitely I'm on a task force for our group based in San Francisco to learn more about and be a support to the reparations following. I just wanted to make sure everybody heard our name. A few people I'm going to be reaching out to based upon the comments. I've gone from talking about what we have done, tried to do, and done locally to saying I'm looking forward to talking to some of you individually down the road. Once again, Greg Pennington, San Francisco Black and Jewish Unity Coalition.
Thank you, Mr. Pennington.
Next commenter is D. Lucian. Mr. Lucian, you've been unmuted. Sorry, I assumed that. Didn't mean to. You may begin speaking. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. This is Daryl Lucian here, calling on behalf of Charles R. Drew University of Medicine and Science. We are the only historically Black graduate institution west of Texas. We have been following some of these discussions with great interest in better understanding the role that this university can play to help, I think, catalyze and bring forth at least some aspect of the vision that this body comes up with. I'll just give you a little bit of information on some of the things that we've been undertaking. Most notably, the institution is well on its way to fulfilling what has been a dream since its inception, which is the opening of its own autonomous medical program. I say autonomous because our current medical plan or program, is a joint venture between ourselves and UCLA. And based on all of the numerous reports that have been published, we are the reason that UCLA receives so much credit for the diversity of its medical program. Again, we're well on our way in starting our own. The legislature appropriated $50 million to this end in the 2021 Budget Act. And we are hopeful through a series of bills and possible other budget requests to raise another $50 million in order to complete that. We are the face of diversity in the medical profession. Between our African American and even our Latino enrollment, we're overwhelmingly educating the vast majority of Black physicians in this state as of right now. And with this new medical program, we'll continue to do that. We have a tremendous focus on indigent care, and most of our alumni from our medical program naturally gravitate toward medically underserved areas, which has long been a goal of the state through various expenditure programs. We want to thank Senator Bradford, Assemblymember Reggie Jones-Sawyer. We want to thank Assemblymember Gibson, other members of the Black Caucus, and some other Latino caucus members who have been very supportive and helpful to our cause and what we're fulfilling. And we look forward to engaging in further dialogue with all of you in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. I would just add, Mr. Lucien, I would just add to Senator Bradford, it was the Black Caucus that secured that $50 million. So thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Our next commenter is Aletta Tor. You've been unmuted. You have 3 minutes. You may begin speaking.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. It's Aletta Torre, as in Kwame Torre. I want to thank, first of all, the AB 3121 Task Force meeting. I would like to say that I am here as a longtime NCOBRA member. I am also a longtime Free the Land member of Republic of New Africa under the direction of former Chokwe Lumumba, and as also with the young people that are learning through things such as New African Scouts, University Sin Fronteras, Red, Black, and Green New Deal. The principles that I wanted to just mention some of the works we've done since last year. The 10 principles of apology and Myafa Institute, reparations, land, funds, health and wellness, education, housing and wealth generation, info and comms infrastructure, sacred sites and monuments, and number 10, criminal justice system that are through the National African Reparations Commission. I represent highly because of our Parable of the Sower intentional community cooperative, the whole piece around funds for cooperative enterprise and socially responsible entrepreneurial development. My cooperative, which came about as the organizing, especially directed out of the South, comes about because of the organizers that are trying to build 7th generational wealth. My great-grandfather, Sterling Alston, in Burlington, North Carolina, built 10 houses for his 10 children. And that homestead has been recognized as what we left in the legacy for those of us that moved to California. We are trying to bring back that significance. We teach that in our communities, and I hope and we support, as well as bring our young people to support you in everything that you do. Again, thank you. And we look forward to the next things that happens and how we can support that movement.
Thank you, Ms. Torre, for your comments today.
One moment. I have one more that needs to move over. Be just a second. Morgan Malachi, could you please press the continue button? Okay, Morgan Malachi, you've been unmuted. You have 3 minutes. You may now speak.
Hi, thank you for letting me speak, and thanks for all the time that you guys volunteer to get this done, because this is important. I just wanted to touch on this being a justice claim that's sacred, and to do that, it's not just about the money, it's not just about the programs that will come with it and anything else. It's really about stamping out the power, and you can't do that if it's watered down. We have to take that seriously. It's really about Black Americans gaining the political power and everything that is pure America through what we have built. And we can't do that if we're watering down the justice claim in ways that don't connect back to our lineage. There was also a suggestion that of a presenter I would like to see talk to this task force, and her name is Mary Frances Berry. She's a professor out of Penn, and she really nails down. She wrote a book on Cali House. She really nails down exactly what reparations would do for Black Americans in terms of the generational wealth gap, and that has to go to a specific group. So I just want to keep that in mind for everybody listening. It's not just about the money and everything that we're owed. It's also about stamping the power that we should have had a long time ago. And we can't do that if it's not inclusionary to a certain group. So that was it. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Ms. Malachi, for your comments today. Trini, do we
That
have any?
was the last commenter at this time. There are no other commenters in the queue.
Chair Moore, it's about 9:45. So what is your pleasure with the rest of the time that's remaining?
We can move on to the next agenda item, which is the approval of the minutes, agenda action item number 3. And if the members of the public would like to call in for public comment between now and 10 a.m., feel free to do so, and we'll pause. So now the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. The minutes from the October 12th and 13th task force meeting were sent with the materials, and we've had a chance to review them. Are there any questions, comments, or corrections regarding the minutes? And to members of the public, the minutes are found online at our website at oag.ca.gov/AB3121. Member Reggie Jones Sawyer, you're recognized.
So I was reading through the minutes. Some of us who are technologically challenged, sometimes we have trouble logging in, and it may take us a minute or two to get in. So we miss when you do the roll call. When you read through the minutes, for me, example, it gives the appearance that I missed half the meeting. And until I either make a motion or something, it gives the appearance that I wasn't there at all when I was at the meeting, just may have been 15 minutes late. So you just acknowledged me now, so I don't know, as members come on, if they've had trouble getting in or they just had previous scheduling problems, they come in, if there's a way that in the minutes they can reflect when that member of this commission comes in, especially if they've made 99% of the meeting, but it gives the appearance, as you read through the minutes, that they weren't there at all.
Absolutely, thank you.
I would, if I can, I would like to add too, I've been trying to log on since 8:50, and I had a viewer log in, not a participant log in, and I wasn't able to log in until 9:20. So I was here well before the meeting started, and all I had was music. So.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure we can accommodate that. Parliamentarian Johnson, is there anything in particular in terms of how that?
Yes, I've already noted. Yes, I noted the record. I indicated on the minutes when I took the, I'm not. Okay, I noted the record that both Member Jones Sawyer and Bradford joined the meeting at approximately 9:15 and 9:20 a.m. So I've already noted our record, and I'm going to send this to the minute keeper so that they will have that. So it will reflect it. And I also have noted that total present was 9 with the additional 2 people.
And thank you, because in the past it wasn't done. That's what I'm looking.
Perfect.
Well, it's done now.
And technically we were here at 9 o'clock, but again, if you give us the wrong login link, you know, it took my staff to get it to me at 9:15.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing that to our attention.
Aisha, there is another commenter.
Hear more?
Yes, we can pause the discussion. Yes, we can pause the discussion on the approval of the minutes and return back to action item number 2, which is the public comment period.
Marjorie Melvin, you've been unmuted.
Good
You may
morning.
now-
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you see me?
No.
Okay, well, I would like to say thank you, Chair Moore, for your work, and thank you to the members of the task force. I just wanted to say that I had the opportunity to meet with Dean Erwin Chemerinsky, along with Chad Brown and Marcus Champion, as members of the California Justice and the Coalition for Just and Equitable California. And I'd just like to reiterate to the task force the importance of what Dean Chemerinsky said. Race, any reparatory or restorative justice program based solely on race would not pass the very high standard of strict scrutiny and would be a violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. And so with that, it is very important to consider and know that in order for any program to pass, it would have to be framed or presented in a way that it would pass equal protection. And according to Dean Chemerinsky, the only way a reparations program would pass is if it was lineage based. This is in no way meant to slight anybody, but just to remind the task force that it's great that we've gotten this far, but we want to win. And in order to win, this any program, reparations program you create must pass constitutional standards. And so we are requesting that you have Dean Chemerinsky speak so he can speak to the legal requirements in order for any reparations program to pass. I'm a second generation Californian. My mother was the very first Black head teacher for Compton Unified School District. Father was one of the very first employees of Boeing. They were able to benefit from some of the programs that the state of California offered. I would like to see California be restored to the great state that it was inclusive of all people, especially Black Americans. You know, I know that you're going to talk about the homelessness in the state. And I'm keenly aware, as an administrative judge, having worked in the area of social services, the number of Black folks, specifically Black Americans, who are in need of social programs, who are homeless. So those are my comments. I want you to really consider having Dean Chemerinsky present to speak with all of you so that any program you passes strict scrutiny and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Thank you very much. And my name is Marjorie Melvin.
Thank you, Ms. Melvin. Thanks for your comments today. Trini, is there anyone else?
There are no other comments at this time.
Okay, Chair Moore, back to you.
Okay, thank you. So we're back to agenda action item number 3, the approval of the minutes. Are there any other questions, comments, or corrections regarding the minutes? Okay, hearing no other questions, comments, or corrections, would a member like to entertain a motion related to the approval of the minutes as they are written?
We approve the minutes.
A second.
Okay. Hearing that it has been moved and seconded to adopt the minutes as corrected, is there any discussion? Okay, so I'm under the understanding that the minutes will be corrected to ascertain Reggie Jones Sawyer's presence, and to also take into acknowledgement Senator Bradford's comments as well. Okay, so hearing no further discussion, we will vote by roll call. Parliamentarian Johnson, you may proceed.
Thank you. Chair Moore,
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown, is he there? I can't see him, so I don't know if he's there. I'll go back to him. Member Bradford,
Aye.
Member Grills,
Aye.
Member Holder,
Aye.
Member Jones Sawyer,
Aye.
Member Scott Lewis,
Aye.
Member Tamaki,
Aye.
Member Montgomery Stepp,
Aye.
and Vice Chair Brown. Okay. It's an aye. Vice Chair Brown, I'm sorry, that was Vice Chair Brown, I believe? No? Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Brown not voting. There are, there were, excuse me, the vote was 8 ayes and no nays. So it was 8-0 in favor of the motion. Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Parliamentarian Johnson. The vote was 8 ayes and 0 nays. The ayes have it and the motion carries. The minutes are approved as corrected. So now it is 9:56 a.m.
Mayor
I
Moore.
would like to to
Excuse
Ms.
me, I'm sorry.
Hurtado.
We had one commenter come on. I wanted to finish with the vote.
Yes, we just finished the vote and now we're returning to Ms. Hurtado and Ms. Martin Walton for our public comment period.
Okay.
Before you invite the next commenter in, we'd like to generally say if there's anyone who has trouble getting on this morning and you have a statement, please feel free to submit your statement via email at reparationstaskforce@doj.ca.gov. All comments will be received and recorded and shared with the task force members. Thank you so much. Okay, Trina?
Okay, Brandon Greene, you have been unmuted. You have 3 minutes. You may speak now. Mr. Greene?
Brandon Greene is one of our expert witnesses for the homelessness and gentrification panels as well.
Okay, I apologize. He was on the attendee side and I promoted him. He asked to be promoted. I promoted him as a commenter. I apologize. There is one over there though. I will this next one will be the last comment.
Yes, we have time for perhaps this would be the last person.
Okay, 225924, you are unmuted. You may now speak. You have 3 minutes. Excuse me, are you trying to make a comment? Two 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 5924.
Trini, I don't believe we have a connection.
Yep, I think.
Okay. Chair Moore, we will turn it over to you. I believe that's the end of the public comments that we have today. What? Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. It is 10 o'clock. If Vice Chair Brown can turn his phone to mute, or if a moderator can mute him, that would be great. Thank you. So it is 10 a.m. Our next action item is action item number 4, which is our infrastructure panel. I would like to introduce our expert witnesses today, but I want to ensure that they're all present. So I see that Dr. Bruce Appleyard is present, Dr. Joseph Gibbons is present, Professor Debra Archer is present. Is Dr. Isaac Martin present?
More, I believe we're checking on Dr. Martin right now.
Well, in the meantime, the public comment period was earmarked until 10:05. So if any members of the public are listening and want to get a last comment in, this would be the time to do so while we're assuring the attendance of our expert witnesses for our next action item.
Trini, do we have anyone else in the queue?
We have 3 in the queue. However,
you're breaking up.
We have 3 people in the, well, 2 people in the queue. However, we're having a little bit of an issue trying to get them over. So 222-5924. Did you wish to make a public comment?
My name is Mario Allen. Am I logged in?
Yes, you are.
Okay, I am ready. Yes.
Okay, please begin speaking. You have 3 minutes.
Okay. Hello, Alan. And I'm just really excited to be on this call with you guys. I actually had the opportunity to meet Don Tamaki at a community meeting in Oakland. And I shared 3 ways that I thought would help protect and distinguish Black people. And I told him, you know, if we're creating laws and making payments, they should be distinguished with equity, access, and protection. And I told him that, I said, because what separates me with a lineage of slavery from maybe a first, second generation African would be, you know, basically that, you know. And I said, you know, I was telling him that, you know, as far as like equity, you know, I think that should belong to the lineage of those that are from slaves. But I think that certain laws should be crafted around ways that we have access to things and the ways we're protected. And the reason I pointed that out, I said, you know, one thing I know is like, if we were to choose like Obama as for instance, his lineage in the country is he's got a lineage to slave owners. You know, he's got an African lineage, but his mother is white. And I said, if you make reparations for everyone, then we would pay white descendants of slave owners. So I think it's maybe best to probably, slice it up in 3 different buckets, the way we're gonna, offer laws and protections and equity. And I thought that maybe equity, access, and protection would be one way. And another way, I've been pretty active with the community outreach with the CJEC. I'm really a new member to that team. And, we're trying to come up with business development strategies to kind of reach out to the community. And I'm hoping to see if the DOJ is going to collaborate with the CJEC with certain business strategies. Back in June, I reached out to some senators. It just sort of gave them proposals of my ideas with community outreach. And I've not been able to, participate with the DOJ in figuring out what type of plans they have for the community outreach so the leaders can get these certain case studies. And that's my concern, is that, maybe the DOJ wouldn't be able to, they probably wouldn't, choose the right leaders and, gather the right case studies for the leaders to, propose reparations. And so that's just my concern. But and so yeah, my name is Mario Allen, and I'll just leave a comment in the box and kind of explain more of what I was trying to say.
Perfect.
Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Allen, so much for your comments today. Trini, how many other people? And we need to check in with Chair Moore.
That was the last commenter.
Okay.
Perfect. Chair Moore, back to you.
Hearing some feedback in the background. Thank you so much.
Oh, and Dr. Martin. Yes, I was just going to add, excuse me, Dr. Martin is here.
Great, yes. Thank you very much, Ms. Aisha Martin-Walton and Ms. Trini Hurtado for your assistance with the public comment period. We will now turn to our infrastructure panel a bit early, but this is great because it gives us more time and space to ask questions and for more time for discussion. So that is great. So now I would take the opportunity to introduce our esteemed expert witnesses today. We're looking forward to hearing from them. One moment, please. So our first speaker is Dr. Isaac Martin. Dr. Isaac Martin is a professor of urban studies and planning at the University of California, San Diego. His mentorship of graduate and undergraduate students has been honored with 4 teaching awards at the University of California, San Diego. He is the author of numerous books and articles on such topics as housing policy, municipal taxation, and the political economy of inequality. His research has been covered on NPR and The New Yorker and The Washington Post. His books have won awards from the American Sociological Association and the Pacific Sociological Association and the Social Science History Association. Then our next speaker will be Dr. Joe Gibbons. Dr. Joe Gibbons is an urban sociologist interested in how neighborhoods affect the well-being of their residents. His research centers on how forces of ethno-racial inequality in the form of residential segregation and gentrification affect individual health and healthy behaviors. A key component of this dynamic is how segregation and gentrification uniquely impact one's sense of connection to their local community. We'll also hear from Dr. Bruce Appleyard. Dr. Bruce Appleyard is an associate professor of city planning and urban design at San Diego State University, where he helps people and agencies make more informed decisions about how we live, work, and thrive. Working at the intersection of transport, land use, and urban design, He is an author of numerous peer-reviewed and professional articles to help practitioners form policies and practices toward achieving a range of sustainability, livability, and social equity objectives. He has expertise in the future of transport, street redesign for bicyclists, pedestrians, and livability, climate action planning, smart growth implementation, transit-oriented development around station along corridors, and social equity analysis. We will also hear from Dr. Debra Archer. Dr. Debra Archer is a professor of clinical law and co-faculty director of the Center on Race, Inequality, and the Law at NYU School of Law and president of the American Civil Liberties Union, or the ACLU. Deborah is a leading expert in civil rights, civil liberties, and racial justice. She is an award-winning teacher and legal scholar whose articles have appeared in leading law reviews. Deborah has also offered for commentary, for numerous media outlets, including MSNBC, National Public Radio, or NPR, CBS, Monocle, The Atlantic, and the New York Times. Each of our expert witnesses will have 20 minutes to speak, and then we will have the task force ask a series of questions and engage in a discussion. To clarify, the order of the speakers are as follows: Dr. Joseph Gibbons, Dr. Bruce Appleyard, Dr. Debra Archer, and then last but not least, Dr. Isaac Martin. Without further ado, I would like to turn to Dr. Joseph Gibbons. You may begin your presentation when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me go ahead and set this up. Go. Can everyone see my PowerPoint slide okay?
Yes.
Great, thank you very much. Good morning. For my talk, I wanted to talk about the historical backgrounds of residential discrimination that currently impact the forces of gentrification that we're seeing across the state of California and really the nation overall. So there are many places where I could start this conversation, but I think a very relevant one for this panel would be with the New Deal. The New Deal did a lot of good for the United States with respects to showing the responsibility that the government had for its residents. But I think there's no real question that it also contributed to a number of problems. And in particular, I will be discussing the impact of home financing programs from this program that use the percent Black in a neighborhood as direct criteria as investments. As you should sound familiar to many here, this is today known as redlining. And these programs, nearly 100 years ago, have had long-term impact on Black neighborhoods across the United States, not just here in California. And this has been widely discussed. What I would like to really highlight here, though, is the consequences of these programs for gentrification. There's a kind of cruel irony here that these programs not only adversely affected the ability of Black communities to build wealth, but would then make them eventually more vulnerable for gentrification, leading to many of the adverse consequences that we associate with this. Specifically, I want to talk about the Homeowners Loan Corporation, or HOLC. This is a program that came into law in 1933 and existed until 1954. And some of you, I trust, are already familiar with this program, but just to briefly recap, its main objective was to offer refinancing for defaulted mortgage. The government would basically buy up a defaulted mortgage and refinance it at a much more agreeable interest rate. Until this time, there really wasn't a ton of regulation on mortgages and refinancing options and interest rates. So this was a huge policy, and really 20% of American households by 1935 had taken advantage of it. Where this program becomes controversial, though, was that they would use neighborhood characteristics as a means to establish the suitability of a home for refinancing. And race would play directly into this. You probably are most familiar with the HOC for these kinds of brightly colorful maps. This is the Pasadena area, although really these maps existed across the state of California. And as I'm sure many of you know already, different colors represent how suitable homes within these places are for refinancing. Greens being the safest investment, red being the least suitable. These would be the areas that we would today consider to be red lines. How these places were kind of classified in this way, the HOLC would empower local teams of assessors to go around. This would be a mix of real estate agents, bankers, politicians, who would use their own knowledge of these neighborhoods to determine how suitable they would be for reinvestment. And based on the policies of the HLC, they were given a fairly free hand in making these decisions. And what you would ultimately find is that these local assessors would vent their opinions about race and pretty racist views into official government document. And we can see this because all these neighborhoods come with associating documentation. So here's one neighborhood in the Pasadena neighborhood, neighborhood D7. And to the right, you will see the associating documentation with that. You may or may not be able to read it, but basically what this is showing is mostly fairly mundane stuff. Vacancy rate of the neighborhood, the average household size, the average home value, the kind of things you would expect in this kind of process. You may also notice near the top right of the screen, it also asks for the percent, or at the time, Negro. And if we go to the bottom of this document, it actually provides more explanation for this. This will probably be not legible, so I went ahead and zoomed in. So what it says is, this area is favorably located, but is detrimentally affected by the 10 owner-occupant Negro families located in the center area going on. Although the Negroes are said to be of better class, their presence has caused a wave of selling in the area, and it seems inevitable that home ownership and property values will drift to lower levels. This area is accorded a high red solely on account of the racial hazard. So this is really telling. A neighborhood that, by the admission of the assessors, is favorable is being devalued principally because of its Black population. And it's important to mention middle and arguably upper middle class Black residents. Not all the forms are this verbose, but even the plainer ones are still quite telling. So here's the next neighborhood a few blocks over, neighborhood D6. This district was originally much smaller, but constant infiltration into other sections as deed restrictions expired has created a real menace, which is greatly concerning property owners. So by deed restrictions, what they mean is until 1948, it was perfectly legal for householders to band together, create these legally binding documents wherein they could not sell their homes to people of color. It's what we would know as racial covenants. And so what this is telling us is that covenant has expired. Black people are moving into the neighborhood, and this is why they're going to devalue it. So two situations where a neighborhood is potentially going to be denied investment in the form of refinancing solely because of its race. Now, there are many consequences from this form of redlining that have been unpacked. The effect on the ability to build wealth because you have to pay less favorable rates, how this worked in conjunction with other forms of residential discrimination, largely trapping of people of color into these neighborhoods. This has all had long-term consequences. And you can see this looking at cities in the state nationwide, or sorry, across the state. So I have here broken down by the grade provided by the HLC, the percent Black over the years. So starting with 1940, onwards to 1980, and then to 2019. And you can see that the C and D grade areas have the largest share of Black residents in cities across the state of California. This program had a direct influence in shaping this. And we can see this. So going back to Pasadena, what you are seeing here is the information from before, but digitized. So we have the redlined areas, the grade D areas, and also the grade C areas highlighted. This was done by researchers over at the University of Richmond who have made this data publicly available. And I've overlaid this onto 1940 demographic data, the percent Black of the time. And you can see that there's really only one area that has a sizable Black population that's really noticeable then. But if we were to jump ahead to 1980, you can see that the increase of the Black population has largely corresponded to where these grade C and grade D areas are. But what's not important is not just this influence, but the story continues and takes some interesting turns. So if we go to 2019, you can see that the Black population in the Pasadena area has expanded somewhat, but the concentrations have declined. This is not something you would only see in the Pasadena area. If you look at historically Black communities across the state, there have been dramatic declines in the concentration of Black residents. You may recall from before, let me just go back for a moment, that the Black populations of California have roughly halved from 1980 to 2019 with respect to their representation in neighborhoods. Many would argue that this is an expression of gentrification. Now, this raises an important question. How would historic redlining relate to gentrification? Well, there are at least two types of paths that this can relate. First, gentrification can directly influence long-term gentrification by undervaluing neighborhoods. So if a neighborhood is being undervalued purely because of the race of the people who reside within, what that means is, like all other criteria, the neighborhood should be fairly decent in terms of the homes, the housing, everything else. But they're experiencing an undervaluing that exists otherwise. And this gap between what the existing value of a home is versus what it could be is something that we know as the rent gap. And the bigger the rent gap, the more appeal a neighborhood will have for would-be gentrifiers, because an area with a very large rent gap means a huge potential profit margin. So on this front, redlining has a very direct association with potential gentrification by shaping the places that have a big rent gap. But also, gentrification can indirectly relate to eventual gentrification as well. So, as we've already established from all the research that's been done, historic redlining affects where communities of color will live over the future. And what has happened over the last few decades is these areas have become increasingly appealing for gentrification. There's a number of explanations for this. One in particular is that city and state officials have tried to make these neighborhoods more appealing for redevelopment in conjunction with local redevelopers. The point being, though, is the historic redlining has influenced what we are seeing today. And we can look back at Pasadena or other places across the state and see that looking at where gentrification has started by different decades, it largely corresponds to the areas that have been historically that were historically redlined. There does appear to be a relationship here. And we can look across the state and see that the areas that tend to gentrify are largely overrepresented into areas that are grade C or D across all the different time periods we have data available for, to the point that by the 2010s, roughly 50%, a little bit more really, of grade C or D areas have started gentrifying. So we've established that there appears to be a link between historic redlining and contemporary gentrification. What are the consequences? Many people will be discussing this today, so I'll keep this brief. I have, however, done extensive research on gentrification and health consequences I think would be relevant here. When we want to understand the consequences of gentrification, there's really two groups that we can think about. First, there are those who have been displaced. Now, there's much that we can be said about the effects of displacement and gentrification. The increase of those who are unhoused, the economic cost for relocation for those who are able to find new housing, more subtle things like the loss of a sense of community identity that you had in the place that you lived, the loss of existing social networks. All of this can have adverse effect on one's well-being. But we also have to think about those who have not necessarily been displaced, those who are able to remain in these neighborhoods. This group has not always received the same amount of attention, but there are consequences for what they are experiencing as well that are worth discussing. Even if you're not in any real immediate danger of being displaced, it doesn't mean you won't fear that as a future possibility. And there's research that I have conducted and others have conducted that have shown that gentrification is associated with what we would call anticipatory stress, the anticipation that it will happen. This is a huge stressor. And also, you can still feel isolated. You might be in a situation which we have seen in many places across the state, and the demographics that I've shown you before suggest that you'll be in a neighborhood where the people become different and the stores become different, to where you can become a stranger in your own community. This can be a source of stress as well. That's worth considering. However, I would like to close by stressing the potential of gentrification to be an opportunity. Let's keep in mind here that at its heart, gentrification, the reintroduction of middle and upper income people into previously deprived areas, may in some ways correct the disinvestment that the government is responsible for through historic redlining. And indeed, if you look at different studies, local residents of gentrifying neighborhoods can improve a lot of the changes that have taken place. New sidewalks, new street lamps, stuff like that. But the problem is, it's not necessarily equitable to everyone who resides within a community. I would argue, and many of my colleagues would also argue, that through the right government intervention on the government, gentrification can be used as a useful force for all who reside in a neighborhood. But again, the key here is through the correct intervention. Now, I was asked, what do I see reparations as? And personally, I would see them as the government taking responsibility to right its past wrongs through a direct and very physical sense. And I can think of largely two areas based on what I've discussed so far that this can be done. So with gentrified neighborhoods, the first step is to give Black residents a stake in these neighborhoods as they change. There are a number of paths that this can be accomplished. I would argue that an important one is fostering locally Black-owned businesses. And this can be accomplished through methods like low-interest loans, directly given to would-be business owners in these areas. A business presence can help mediate local issues, advocate for local things that these neighborhoods may be. So it gives us a really direct stake. Secondly, we need to give local residents in these areas a sense of security that they're not going to be displaced. So one way that this can be done is through direct cash-based assistance to help manage housing costs for areas that are seeing dramatic increases in their home costs. Now, this can be done for homeowners, and there are some measures that exist, but I think it's really imperative that we also think about renters. So are there direct cash-based assistance programs that could be targeted directly towards Black renters in gentrifying neighborhoods? The overall goal is to give the residents of these neighborhoods a sense that they're not going to be pushed out right away, to kind of alleviate the sense of stress and fear. Gentrification can be used in a useful way with the right intervention. So to surmise, Black neighborhoods across the state have experienced a form of historic redlining, which directly took into account racial and ethnic concentrations of these neighborhoods, which has had adverse long-term effects on these communities, which, in a cruel, ironic twist, has made them more appealing for eventual gentrification. Areas that were once written off because of their racial characteristic are now becoming inaccessible for these very same people as a result of gentrification. And reparations are a way for the government to take responsibility for its complicity in this process to right these past wrongs. I would like to thank the research assistants for my graduate students, Tabitha Page and Kitty Brandy, and also the Mapping Inequality Project for making the University of Richmond for making this data available to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gibbons, for that excellent presentation. We will now go to our next speaker, Dr. Bruce Appleyard. You may begin when you are ready.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. It's a real honor to be here. I'm an associate professor of city regional planning at San Diego State University. In thinking about reparations and infrastructure, we need to think about the larger ecosystem of transportation, housing, and land use, and the ways the public and private sectors have created inequities and harms to African Americans through a multidimensional and systematic array of discriminatory policies from the federal government on down. This effectively created a unique form of American apartheid that must be corrected. To give an overview, African Americans have been harmed in the following ways: by being barred from mortgage assistance in their own communities, by the building of highways through their communities that tore them apart and barricaded them off from opportunities, through displacement and community severance from urban renewal and eminent domain, by being forbidden from buying houses in the white affluent suburbs, unable to access schools and other career advancing opportunities, by being less served by the bus transit system they relied upon for mobility, by being more vulnerable in the streets to both police and traffic violence, and by being overrepresented in the homeless population. Excuse me. And now African American communities are vulnerable to displacement and community severance that can come from growing forces of gentrification. So the first harm, redlining. The federal government, starting in the 1930s, further discriminatory practices by discouraging and the refinance of at-risk loans in and near African American neighborhoods through the policy known as redlining. This was effectively like a bailout during the Depression era. This is where the Homeowners Loan Corporation, working in concert with local real estate agents, marked Black communities with red and gave them a grade of D or hazardous investment. In tandem, the Federal Housing Administration seriously limited the insurance of mortgages in these communities, and the banks followed suit. In effect, the federal government, working with local actors, actively crippled African Americans in their ability to buy and secure homes in their own communities, effectively lowering home values, wealth creation, and the ability to move up in the middle class. And I should say that this was basically broadening and deepening what was happening at the local level. So the federal government is implicated in this, but it was also something that local actors were actively a part of. The FHA discouraged banks from making any loans at all in urban neighborhoods, rather than newly built suburbs. According to the FHA underwriting manual, quote, older properties have a tendency to accelerate the rate of transition to lower class occupancy. And if you couldn't obtain FHA-backed loans, you were subject to predatory lending practices with high interest rates and punitive terms, where you could actually lose your home if you missed a payment or two. And to sort of talk about the redlining and poverty rates, this is Council Member Montgomery Steps district in Southeast San Diego, where you can see the redlining, but we can also see on the right the poverty rates and sort of a continuing legacy of harm and poverty in the areas that were redlined. Harm number 2, highway building. Another major harm came in the way of highway development through Black neighborhoods that forcibly carved and ripped up whole communities while walling them off from otherwise adjacent opportunities. And here we can see the I-980 freeway plowing through West Oakland and walling it off from the adjacent downtown as it links up with I-880. And I-980 is actually slated, it's actually a candidate to possibly be removed. And this graphic shows an image of the freeway coming through the neighborhood. The FHA also favored mortgages in areas where boulevards or highways served to separate African American families from whites, stating that, quote, natural or artificially established barriers will prove effective in protecting a neighborhood and the locations within it from adverse influences, including prevention of the infiltration of lower class occupancy and inharmonious racial groups. And this is sort of the language that the FHA used to discriminate against African Americans. Here's an example from Detroit, Michigan, of Hastings Street, which was a vibrant African American commercial center, and it was plowed through and plowed under by the Chrysler Freeway, as we can see here in 1961. And here's another picture from Detroit as well, showing similar destruction and damage. In this picture, you can see the church in both images, and you can see how it destroyed this vibrant African American community. This is a map showing the freeways that have ripped through West Oakland, I-980, the Mandela, what is now what used to be the Cypress structure, and 880. And from the help of my colleague, Dr. Gibbons, he gave me this graphic that shows us not only the redlined areas, also the freeways, and also the location of the concentrations of African Americans. Harm number 3, urban renewal and eminent domain. Places like West Oakland were also ravaged by forces of urban renewal, from public housing to military port reclamation. In the 1950s, when the federal government started handing out millions for projects, the city declared the redlined areas slums and began to clear them out. All of this at the hands of the federal government, which was effectively an unreachable force that community members could not communicate with, like they could a mayor or a city councilor. And again, these are pictures of the 980 freeway. An example of eminent domain gone wrong is in the case of Bruce's Beach, when in 1912, Will and Charles Bruce purchased land in Manhattan Beach. Since the surrounding beaches were mostly off limits to African Americans, they built a thriving resort for them. Constantly facing harassment and violence from the surrounding white community, the Bruces had their land seized by the city in the 1920s by way of eminent domain, purportedly for the use as a park, and the city would not build this park for nearly 30 years. On September 30th, 2021, Gavin Newsom signed a bill that gave land back to the descendants of Will and Charles Bruce. And this is actually something that we can think about in terms of reparations. It's actually returning land that was taken under eminent domain in the past. Harm number 4, banned from the suburbs. On top of redlining and highway building, the FHA was subsidizing builders who were mass producing entire subdivisions for whites, with the requirement that none of the homes be sold to African Americans. Let's fast forward to today, and we can see that the areas that were redlined are now ripe for redevelopment, as there are now more affordable and more accessible locations to transit and highways. Through the use of the smart mobility calculator that I developed for Caltrans, which you can find online, we can also see that the disadvantaged communities in formerly redlined neighborhoods that are shown in hatching have some of the lowest vehicle miles traveled in greenhouse gas emissions, as shown in the blue-green areas. All this makes them attractive for development to meet California's climate action goals, especially through such bills as SB 10, SB 743, and SB 35, which is streamlining secret processes for affordable housing. All of this means measures need to be in place to help stop displacement that can come from gentrification, as discussed by my colleague, Joe Gibbons. Another issue, impacts of wealth creation. Today, African-American incomes on average are about 60%, incomes on average are about 60% of average white incomes. But African-American wealth is only about 5 to 9% white wealth. Most middle-class families in this country gain their wealth from the equity they have in their homes. According to Rothstein, this enormous difference between 60% income ratio and a 5 to 9% wealth ratio is almost entirely attributable to federal housing policy implemented through the 20th century. And we see a graphic showing this disparity on the right. Harm number 5, public transit. Another way infrastructure has created inequities and discriminations is in how public transit has been funded and operated. Oftentimes, transit funding is being applied to the development of expensive rail projects that serve white suburbs at the expense of bus service that serves communities of color. Several famous cases have fought this battle, namely the LA Bus Riders Union in the 1990s and the Darrinsburg versus MTC case in the San Francisco Bay Area in the 90s and 2000s. So the difference between funding BART versus AC Transit in Oakland was part of the Darrinsburg versus MTC case. Harm number 6, police stops and traffic violence. When thinking of infrastructure, we also need to think of how things affect people walking, bicycling, and driving. And here are some statistics. People killed while walking are twice as likely to have a low income. African American children are twice as likely than white children to be killed while walking. Drivers of color are stopped by police at a rate double the national average, 24% versus 12%. For Black drivers, the likelihood of being searched has ranged from no difference to 4 times as frequently as white drivers. And this graphic from San Jose shows the difference in comparing driver and pedestrian stop rates with the underlying population. And in the bar graphs that I've circled shows that African-American pedestrians are stopped at a rate about 5 times that of their underlying population. And almost 3 times as much for drivers. If we take this sort of analysis and overlay it on previously redlined areas and look at the areas in between, we can see that there's an effective cordon around a cordon wall, a police wall around former redlined areas and the areas of communities of color, where you can see on the pullout that I've shown in the middle is that the inner circle shows police stops by race, the outer circle shows underlying population by race, and so you can see that there's an effective wall being created, a police wall being created to even further ghettoize these communities through police stops and other harassment. We also have, just so you know, we also are doing, we're doing studies, this is with Dr. Channon and Dr. Gibbons. We're doing studies looking at the effective rate of conviction and showing that there's a lower incidence of actually finding evidence from these police stops for persons of color. Harm number 7, homelessness. African Americans are also often overrepresented in the homeless population. From a survey in San Diego, African Americans account for 31% of the homeless population, while only constituting about 5% of the underlying population. So clearly something needs to be done about this. So in closing, on top of reparations, we can think about policy remedies as follows. Open up new neighborhoods and suburbs to African Americans by getting rid of exclusionary single-family zoning and allowing townhomes and apartments in those zones. And the map on the right shows that most of the Bay Area's residential development, 85% of it is single-family zoning, and you can see a kind of enormous amount of potential to open up those zones. SB 9 and SB 35 both go a long way toward making this happen, but banks also need to make changes to facilitate financing for home ownership in these types of developments. These starter homes would allow more access to build wealth and enter the middle class. For highways that were built through neighborhoods, we can offer reparations and support to businesses and other funding programs like those offered in Syracuse, New York. We can also tear them down or run them underground and reconnect the community, as is being discussed about I-980 in Oakland. For neighborhoods attracting gentrification, we can create anti-displacement programs which include rental and home buying assistance, business loans, and other programs. And I also think we should look to create a well-funded bank to invest in communities of color, to fund businesses, home loans, et cetera. Now, in closing, I want to turn to the Kerner Commission from 1968, which was created to help understand what was happening because of the urban riots starting in 1964 in Detroit and peaking in Watts in 65 and then continue on. And they offer what I consider is probably one of the most honest, self-effacing statements that we've seen from the federal government in a long time. And I'm offering this because I think it's something that we need to recognize and use today. Segregation and poverty have created in the racial ghetto a destructive environment totally unknown to most white Americans. What white Americans have never fully understood, but what the African American can never forget, is that white society is deeply implicated in the ghetto. White institutions created it, white institutions maintain it, and white society condones it. And I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Appleyard, for that amazing presentation. We will now turn to Professor Debra Archer, for her presentation. And Professor Archer, you may begin when you are ready. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the task force for inviting me to speak with you today about the role of transportation infrastructure in driving racial inequality. I really do appreciate the breadth of the testimony that you've been seeking over the course of your work to address slavery and its legacy. Slavery was a system of theft. It was theft of life as people were stolen, enslaved, and brutalized. Slavery was theft of property through forced labor. It was theft of identity and home as people were repeatedly ripped from the community and culture that are really central to human experience. And it was theft of happiness, dignity, and potential. And slavery became imprinted onto the DNA of the nation and really remains the foundation of racial inequality. And after the abolition of slavery, new systems of white supremacy evolved in its place to continue the theft and exploitation that were at slavery's core. And today I'm going to speak briefly about the role that highways have played in sustaining slavery's legacy, adding to what we just heard from Dr. Appleyard. So transportation infrastructure has always been a driver of racial inequality. The benefits and burdens of our transportation system, from highways to roads, bridges, sidewalks, and as we just heard, public transportation, have been planned, developed, sustained to pull resources from Black communities, resources that were subsequently redeployed and invested to the benefit of predominantly white communities and their residents. And this system is really a daily reminder of how Black people and Black communities have been and continue to be sacrificed to feed America's growth and expansion. White, middle class, and affluent neighborhoods are favored at the expense of Black communities, producing lopsided and skewed patterns of infrastructure development. And although our transportation racism is no longer marked by the kind of explicit racial divisions that we saw in the past, it continues to entrench racial segregation, limit access to jobs, health, and opportunity, force Black people and Black communities to bear a disproportionate share of environmental harms and other burdens, and to extract wealth from Black communities and Black people. Safe, accessible, reliable infrastructure is disproportionately built in white neighborhoods, connecting those residents to opportunity, while Black communities continue to suffer from underdevelopment. And as I said today, I want to highlight the specific role of our system of highways, because the officials who built the interstate highway system in the 1950s and 1960s were often motivated explicitly by racism and placed little value on Black lives, Black families, and Black communities. And by the time the interstate highway system was completed in the early 1970s, it had fundamentally restructured urban America. And in almost every region of the country, the new interstate highway system uprooted, displaced, and isolated hundreds of thousands of people. The United States Department of Transportation estimated that more than 475,000 households and more than 1 million people were displaced nationwide as a direct result of federal highway building. Many people think those numbers are low, but layered on top of that, many more people were displaced by state highway projects. And then after the bulldozers left, millions of additional people were left living in hollowed out communities. The property that was taken, the neighborhoods that were destroyed, the businesses that were lost, and the families that were displaced were overwhelmingly Black. And this was by design. The nation's highways were built through and around Black communities, destroying them, along with the homes, businesses, and lives in those communities, and created physical barriers to integration. So these highways served as walls and wedges and extractors in Black communities around the country. So first, the highways as a tool of removal. In states around the country, highway construction displaced Black households, but really cut the heart and soul out of thriving Black communities as homes, churches, schools, and businesses were destroyed. And in some communities, the highway became the tool that white government officials and white residents had been looking for years to displace those Black communities. The destruction of a Black community to make way for I-95 in the Overtown section of Miami, Florida, I think provides an example of how construction of the highway was often used to actualize a racial agenda, to destroy vibrant and economically self-sufficient Black communities. So I-95 tore through the center of Overtown, which was a large and, as I said, vibrant Black community, then considered to be the center of economic and cultural life for Black people living in Miami. And it was the realization of a decades-long campaign by white business leaders to remove Black residents and claim that land to expand Miami's central business district. And by the late 1960s, Overtown was dominated by the highway, and there was really no evidence at all of why it was once called the Harlem of the South. Really, no corner of Overtown was saved. And although nearly 40,000 Black people lived in Overtown before the highway expansion, only about 8,000 remained in a hollowed out community after the highway was built. Similarly, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a Black community known as the Hill District was devastated in order to build I-579. And when I-579 opened to traffic, it had effectively cut off the Hill District from Pittsburgh's thriving downtown area and displaced thousands of Black residents. The population of the Hill District dropped from about 54,000 in 1950 to about 9,000 in 2013, and more than 400 businesses were lost. And you really cannot overstate the impact of this kind of wealth extraction. And the community was essentially damned. And today, about 40% of the Hill District's residents live below the poverty line. In communities around the country, some people who could not or did not want to move remained in those hollowed out communities adjacent to the highway, trying to rebuild and having lost value in their homes as well. And those communities and their residents also bear the marks of decades of accumulated disadvantage. Highway building gutted the economic core of these communities and killed off a generation of businesses. The elimination of Black-owned businesses through displacement deeply impacted segregated communities that were already deprived of economic investment. Ownership of homes and businesses is really critical in building generational wealth. And highway projects rob Black people of those resources and those opportunities. And second, and very importantly, the highway was a tool of a segregationist agenda that erected a post-Jim Crow wall that separated white and Black communities. It protected white people from Black migration, and it further entrenched racial segregation and walled off economic opportunity. So instead of going through Black communities, some highways just encircled them to contain and confine Black residents. And they were assisted by existing racial segregation patterns, redlining, and the racial zoning laws that were rampant at that time. So highway builders were able to build highways on previously formal or informal boundary lines between white and Black neighborhoods and skirt legal prohibitions on racial discrimination at the time. And this was often accomplished at the explicit request of white residents who feared integration. And then finally, I will note that the erection of highways between Black and white communities, or these structures that encircled Black communities, sent a clear message of racial hierarchy. This kind of government-imposed segregation was a show of power of white people over the lives of Black people, ensuring Black people understood what they believed was their place. And these examples are just the tip of the iceberg. Virtually every state has a story about a highway destroying a Black community. And of course, this includes California, where throughout the 1940s to the 1960s, the selection of routes for major transportation corridors in cities like Los Angeles and Fresno and Oakland had a direct and devastating impact on Black communities. One of the most well-known examples is Sugar Hill. The history of Sugar Hill illustrates a shining example of how removing quote-unquote slums was often blatantly pretextual, offering an excuse for the state to target Black neighborhoods and pursue an anti-Black agenda. Sugar Hill was, of course, named after the legendary neighborhood in Harlem, and it was the heart of cosmopolitan life for many affluent Black people who lived in Los Angeles. And Black people fought for their right to live in this community and only won that right after white residents of the neighborhood unsuccessfully sued to enforce racially restrictive covenants. But that victory was, of course, short-lived because in the early 1960s, Sugar Hill was bisected by the new Santa Monica Freeway, with the government seizing homes through eminent domain and providing really inadequate compensation. And at the time, it was reported that the freeway was routed through Sugar Hill in order to save Fraternity and Sorority Row in the area around USC. And this kind of destruction has really had lasting impacts. Communities like Sugar Hill or the Pico neighborhood in Santa Monica and the families who live there often bear the burdens of decades of accumulated disadvantage, racial segregation, concentrated poverty, economic isolation, and they have lasting impacts on economic mobility, wealth creation, health, community stability. And of course, the interstate highway system did not cause every problem facing urban communities, nor did it really single-handedly create wealth inequality. But it did compound discrimination, exclusion, and exploitation. And I think it triggered a process that weakened Black neighborhoods and robbed Black communities and Black people of wealth. So while the highways connected white people living in suburbia with economic opportunities in the city, Black residents were excluded from those white neighborhoods. And when the highways destroyed their homes, paying them little or nothing for the destruction of their most valuable asset, Black residents were forced to find new housing in communities that were already intensely segregated by race and class, further entrenching racial segregation and taxing inadequate housing, employment, and public services. So in the end, highway construction destroyed Black communities and corralled Black people away from opportunity, contributing to today's intense racial segregation, concentrated racialized poverty, and created physical, economic, and psychological barriers that persist to this day. I think there are several ways to right the wrongs of the past, including direct payments for home and businesses that were lost, for people's homes that were taken without compensation, for businesses taken without compensation, or for homes or businesses that were taken for very little compensation. And it also includes opportunities and support for displaced residents or their descendants to return to those communities, to live in those communities, to build businesses in those communities. It could include deep and sustained investment in impacted communities. Also, as Dr. Appleyard mentioned, it can include doing the work of removing or recessing highways and trying to weave communities back together again. And finally, ensuring that Black communities are not targeted again as we enter a period of widespread infrastructure development. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Professor Archer, for that amazing presentation. We will now turn to Dr. Isaac Martin. You may begin your presentation when you are ready.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to address this task force. My testimony today will concern just some of the enduring effects of 20th century urban renewal on African American communities in California. So you can think of my testimony here as focusing on numbers 2 and 3 on the list of harms that Dr. Appleyard enumerated, and as dovetailing, I think, very closely with the testimony of Dr. Archer. Urban renewal is a name we now use for several policies that provided federal funding to state and local governments for the purpose of remaking cities in partnership with private businesses in the middle decades of the 20th century. Those policies included, among others, the Federal Housing Acts of 1937, 1949, and 1954, the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, which, as you've heard, was particularly important, various state laws such as California's Community Redevelopment Law of 1951 that authorized the creation of redevelopment agencies, and the local implementing actions that created redevelopment agencies and made use of them to condemn and redevelop property. In the mid-20th century, the policymakers and planners who led urban renewal efforts explicitly aimed to reduce density and to separate land uses from each other. Urban renewal was used to clear the land for the development of both privately owned structures and public infrastructure, especially, but by no means only, highways. Clearing the way for major infrastructure investments meant displacing existing land uses, including existing residential communities. By 1969, according to the estimates of the urban planning scholar Emily Talon, at least 910,000 units were demolished with financing from federal urban renewal programs. By her estimate, at least 330,000 of them specifically to make way for highways. As we've heard from Dr. Archer, that's a low estimate. Often plans for urban renewal called for replacement housing, but housing was not replaced on a one-for-one basis, and it often was not affordable to previous residents of a redeveloped area. The communities targeted for urban renewal were predominantly low income. Many of them were also disproportionately Black. One particularly well-known example in California is the Fillmore district in San Francisco. This diverse neighborhood was home to a large African-American community when the San Francisco City Planning Commission declared it blighted and announced a plan for its redevelopment in 1947. The plan included major infrastructure investments, including new schools, parks, recreation facilities, and a freeway extension, along with thousands of new apartments for middle and upper income families. Not all of that development happened as planned, but the demolition did. The city planning scholar Clement Lai has reported that redevelopment of the area displaced 8,000 residents over the next 2 decades, many of them Black. It also displaced a small but important enclave of Black-owned businesses and community institutions that serve the broader African-American community of San Francisco and beyond. Another especially well-documented example from California that you've heard about in Dr. Appleyard's testimony is West Oakland. Federal, state, and local government agencies demolished thousands of homes in this once thriving majority Black neighborhood in order to make way for new highways and light rail that would funnel commuters from the suburbs into San Francisco. The historian Robert Self has estimated that West Oakland lost between 6,600 and 9,700 housing units in the first 6 years of the 1960s, displacing, by his estimate, more than 10,000 people. Caltrans in the 1990s sponsored some oral history interviews with former residents of West Oakland. One such resident who was interviewed, Landon Williams, gave an oral history interview in which he recalled that in the 1950s, when he grew up there, it was a Black community with a vibrant commercial strip running through it until the Nimitz Freeway and the Bay Area Rapid Transit carved through the neighborhood. And in his words, they wiped it out and the ground lay fallow for like 10 years. One could, of course, tell similar stories about many majority African-American communities in San Francisco far outside the Bay Area. These examples both come from the Bay Area, but they're certainly not unique. Many other Black communities in California and beyond were disrupted by major transportation infrastructure investments. The economists Jeffrey Brinkman and Jeffrey Lynn have documented in a sample of 50 US cities that the predicted probability of freeway selection in 1966 was more than 6 percentage points higher for an all-Black neighborhood compared to an all-white neighborhood, holding constant other neighborhood characteristics. In other words, this wasn't merely a function of the fact that Black people tended to live near the urban core or in areas where it otherwise might have made sense to locate freeways. Although these urban renewal projects did bring major infrastructure investments into neighborhoods with residents, they also displaced many of those Black residents, and most of the people who enjoyed the benefits of the infrastructure investment were not the Black people who had previously lived in the neighborhoods. The costs of these infrastructure investments were shared by all taxpayers insofar as the investments were paid for in part by state and federal tax revenues. They also, however, had other kinds of costs, as you've heard, that were borne most especially by the previous residents who stayed in or were displaced from those neighborhoods. The cost to those who were displaced included the expense of moving, and in some unknown number of cases, an increase in their rent. Many of those who were displaced in most of these neighborhoods, perhaps a majority, were renters, and so any compensation provided under eminent domain went to their landlords rather than to them. The cost to those who remained included such disamenities as obstacles to travel within the neighborhood, as you've heard, barriers, the establishment of barriers, not just between Black and white neighborhoods, but cutting through the middle of many Black neighborhoods in California, new exposure to air pollution from nearby freeways, and these disamenities in turn imposed economic harms. For example, it could become much harder to sustain a small retail business when a freeway condemned the houses of your customer base and cut you off from foot traffic. The particular cost to the neighbors in an urban renewal area also included non-economic harms that are harder to quantify, but I think I'm echoing previous speakers when I say there's something priceless about having a community of friends and neighbors, and there's something lost when that community is cut off by infrastructure investments that do not serve your community. Although the flows of federal money for urban redevelopment and highway construction contracted in the 1970s, urban freeway construction and state-led redevelopment of the urban core continued. One way to document the ongoing legacy of redevelopment for Black communities is to compare the changing availability of housing in census tracts that were predominantly Black and census tracts that were predominantly non-Black. I'm going to report here briefly the results of an analysis of net housing units lost by census tract in California from 1970 to 2010. I believe Trini has my slides, and Trini, if you would go ahead and load them up now, if you can show the slides, that would be helpful. In the meantime, I'll describe the comparison I'm going to show you. Right, thank you. So this is a comparison of census tracts in California from 1970 to 2010. I am focusing in particular on only those tracts whose boundaries could be matched from 1970 to the boundaries of 2010 census tracts, to be sure that the comparison really is a before and after snapshot of the same place. This 40-year period after 1970 is after the period when the bulk of displacement that's associated with urban renewal happened. This is after the period that's conventionally regarded as the heyday of urban renewal, but it included the heyday of the California redevelopment agencies, the construction of hundreds more miles of freeways in California, and ongoing struggles over the location of urban infrastructure. This is the period in which additional freeway investments cut through communities in San Diego, for example, the 15 through the heart of the City Heights neighborhood. It also included many other events, such as fires and earthquakes, that may have reduced the number of housing units. So what I'm showing you here is simply whether lost housing units were replaced. Most California census tracts added more housing units than they lost after 1970, but some lost housing units overall. And those that lost net housing units after 1970 were disproportionately Black in 1970. The average percentage of residents who were Black in census tracts that would subsequently lose housing units was 26%. The average percentage of residents in neighborhoods that would subsequently gain net housing units over the next 40 years was 9%. So in other words, the neighborhoods that would lose housing after 1970 in California were disproportionately Black. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. Another way to look at the same data is to compare majority Black neighborhoods, as I've said, to majority non-Black neighborhoods, and assess their likelihood of losing net housing stock over the next 40 years. That's what this graph shows. Among tracts that were majority non-Black in 1970, only 9% of those tracts in this sample that I was able to study lost housing units over the next 40 years. Among tracts that were majority Black in 1970, 31% lost net housing units from 1970 to 2010. And neighborhoods that lost housing also lost Black residents over this 40-year period. The census tracts in the sample that lost net housing units on average lost also an average of 229 Black residents over the period. The census tracts that gained housing units gained an average of 30 Black residents per tract over this period. So this is a story not just of the destruction of housing units in places that were majority Black, it's also a story of the dispersion of Black people throughout California. In short, many of the African-American residential communities that existed in California in 1970 would eventually lose more housing units to the bulldozer and the wrecking ball than they would gain from new investment over the next 40 years. I'll really briefly show a couple of maps to provide a visual illustration of the association between where African-American residential communities were located and where housing demolition subsequently removed more homes than were later built. It's a simple comparison. I'm not going to, I don't have data here on where those housing units were specifically lost to infrastructure investments, although I think you'll see from the aerial view here, you can, if you're familiar with some of the cities I'm going to show, it won't be a surprise to see where some of those areas are. Next slide, please. So this is a patchwork map of Alameda County. You can see only some parts of the county are shown. That's because only some census tracts could be compared on an apples to apples basis from 1970 to 2010. So I'm again focusing on places where I can be really sure we're talking about the same place over time. The darker the gray here, the greater percentage of residents in the tract were Black. Of course, you can, if you're familiar with Alameda County, you can see that bit to the left there that looks like Jaws, that's around the port, and West Oakland is there. Just north of that is West Berkeley and Richmond, California. That's 1970, again, after the displacement of some 10,000 residents from West Oakland. Next slide, please. And yet housing units continue to be lost and not replaced in these census tracts after 1970. The dark gray here represents the tracts that lost more housing units than they gained over the next 40 years. The impression you should get here is simply that places that were that had substantial Black majorities or substantial Black populations in 1970 were places that were a little more likely than other places to lose more housing units than they gained. Next slide will show you Los Angeles County, just very briefly. So again, 1970, this shows you by census tract the percentage of residents who were Black in different census tracts in LA, darker gray meaning a higher percentage. And you can see there in South LA, of course, a familiar heart of much of the Black community in Los Angeles County. Next slide, please. And you can see again here, dark gray here representing where housing units were lost in greater numbers than they were gained. Once again, that's concentrated there in South LA, and it is in proximity to freeways and other infrastructure investments. These are places where urban renewal had previously happened, and what we see here is that these are also places where subsequent urban redevelopment continued to remove housing units faster than they were replaced in communities that were, in some cases, predominantly Black, and in many cases had substantial Black minorities in them. All right, that's all for my slides. Thank you. I'm going to conclude with some brief remarks here. Some caveats about the comparison. I just showed you some very abstracted maps. Of course, I've not documented whether the destruction of housing units in one neighborhood was later made up by the construction of new housing units elsewhere in the same city. The data I presented doesn't tell us anything about what happened to the residents who were displaced, how many of those residents were worse off than they would have been in the absence of redevelopment. At a minimum, all I've shown with these data are that 40 years of redevelopment after 1970 yielded different amounts of housing in predominantly Black and predominantly non-Black neighborhoods. That descriptive comparison, though, I think is enough to tell us the legacy of urban renewal differed across neighborhoods. And it should also tell us that the stories of loss that have been passed down to us from residents of the Fillmore, from residents of West Oakland, and from residents of other urban Black communities like those places in California are not at all unique. Historians have recorded many of the stories of residents of those particular places, but the former residents of many other African American communities in California could recount similar histories. I'd like to conclude with some general remarks that I think might be relevant to the deliberations of the task force. First, the legacy of urban renewal in California included negative consequences that were sometimes felt by Californians of all races and ethnicities, but that were disproportionately felt by African American people who lived in predominantly African American communities. The net impact of urban renewal on wealth creation for African Americans has not yet, to my knowledge, been measured in dollars. That impact, though, I think may well have been negative in many cities, and the negative economic impacts of urban renewal on many Black individuals and families may be assumed to have compounded other well-documented harms associated with intergenerational dispossession and ongoing racial discrimination in housing and credit markets. Second, both public and private investments in infrastructure sometimes contributed to displacing Black people, Black-owned businesses, and Black community institutions. Many neighborhoods that were targeted for urban renewal badly needed new infrastructure, but in many cases that infrastructure was provided in a way that did not benefit residents of those neighborhoods, and in fact it harmed them while benefiting others. It would be fair in many cases to describe this, I think, as exploitation. Third, I would also note that the effects of urban renewal on community institutions in some predominantly African American neighborhoods might be regarded as a collective injury. By that, I mean that it harms Black people who may not even have lived in that neighborhood. To the extent that the opportunity for Black people to live in the same places, in the same urban neighborhoods with other Black people, created new opportunities for Black people's economic empowerment in the middle decades of the 20th century, for greater opportunities for Black political power at that time. We might regard the disruption caused by urban renewal as a kind of collective harm affecting even Black people who lived outside of the places where the most disruptive impacts happened. And the last point I'd like to conclude with is that urban renewal took place within living memory. The legacies of urban renewal include physical infrastructures such as freeways that still divide neighborhoods, organizations such as redevelopment agencies that persisted for decades after urban renewal, and processes of neighborhood transformation that have continued to take place long after the middle decades of the 20th century that historians regard as the time of urban renewal proper. To the extent that urban renewal caused harms and the legacy of urban renewal caused harms to African American communities that could be addressed by reparations, those harms do not lie in the distant past. Our elders remember them. And that is where I will conclude my testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Isaac Martin, for that thorough testimony. It is now 11:15, so we have 15 minutes reserved for questions, comments, and discussion, and then we will go to lunch and then reconvene after lunch. So I'll start off the question, and then I'll go to the rest of our esteemed task force members. I had a question for the panelists about President Biden's infrastructure plan. As you know, it's over $100 trillion, and these monies will be distributed to the states for the states to then decide how to fix any infrastructure needs that there are in the states. But what makes this plan, and I would hope that the experts can maybe expand upon it, different from other infrastructure plans, is that there's a built-in provision that allows for states to use these funds to correct any racial inequities that existed due to previous ways in which these infrastructure plans have been used to harm Black communities. So I guess my question, and it's a very open-ended question, is if any of the experts can kind of educate the public and even task force members like myself a bit about Biden's infrastructure plan, if you all have any knowledge about it, and maybe expand upon or expound upon the intersections between the work that we're doing with that plan. And you all have kind of already answered some of that in terms of providing some policy recommendations. But again, my open-ended question is pointed to, is there a way that this task force can kind of, communicate to the state of California through that built-in provision of Biden's plan, concrete ways in which that infrastructure plan can be used to help repair Black California?
I'll take that. Can you hear me?
Yes, Dr. Appleyard.
Yeah, I think that the Biden's infrastructure plan presents a great opportunity to think about how we can repair the past harms of freeway expansion in African American neighborhoods. And the 980 freeway comes to mind as there's already been discussions about, and this is the one that connects I-24 with I-880 through Oakland, through West Oakland. And it could be a candidate for removal and then trying to repair and reconnect the community. Of course, once the freeway's gone in, it's done some irreparable harm of displacement. And so I think the task force could really actually promote this infrastructure bill to look at freeways around the state of California that can be looked at for removal. and repairing and reconnecting the community. I think the Sugar Hill example that was brought up is also one that could be looked at as well. But I also think that bus transit funding can also should also be promoted as something that needs to, because bus transit is more often what supports the African American community, and so funding for bus transit could also be an important component of the infrastructure bill as well. The Syracuse, New York program that helped provide business loans to community members around one of their viaducts, one of their freeway viaducts, is also something that could be looked at as well. So I think creating a sort of a bank that serves Black-owned businesses and homeowners that could be promoted by the task force would all to work in tandem with the infrastructure bill would be a good idea.
Thank you. Senator Bradford, and then Member Jones Sawyer. We'll get a cue. Member Montgomery Stepp, Vice Chair Brown, and then Member Holder. So Member Bradford, you're recognized.
Thank you, and I want to appreciate the presenters for that very thorough and comprehensive presentation. I would just add a little bit of caution as the author of the Bruce Beach Legislation 796. I would be a little hesitant to really qualify that as reparations. What we feel we did with Bruce's Beach is return that which was stolen, which was owed. See it as no different as if your car was stolen, your wallet was stolen, and someone returns that to you. That's not a gift. I think reparations is what has been promised and what is owed and what has been denied. But again, Bruce's Beach, Greenwood, Allensworth, those are prime examples of racism that stole generational wealth and does need to be addressed. But I find those more of atonement and righting a wrong, and not as much as reparations, because I think reparations is something that we were never given and we're entitled to. That's my only comment. But thank you for your presentations, very much so.
Thank you.
Thank you. Member Jones Sawyer, you're recognized.
And so I'm really, and I also want to thank the speakers, and especially this concept on gentrification, where gentrification could actually be used to our benefit. And I'll give the example that if the Native Americans early on had leased the land at Manhattan Island, where would they be right now? In South LA, instead of selling the land, taking that suitcase full of dollars, if we leased that property to wealthy white people coming into the district, not only would that person make money from that home that they owned, that they paid outright, and other ideas that we could come up with where we could use gentrification to our advantage to improve our communities, but still retain the properties, but still use the properties to benefit us. I mean, if you look at the royal family, I don't think they've worked a day in their life, but I think because they own land, a lot of land, and they lease it out, they never have to work another day in their life. And that may be a way that African Americans can use our land that we own, especially in places like South LA, that we don't sell out our money, that we don't give up our mineral rights. Nobody ever talks about the mineral rights that are underneath. We give away mineral rights like you wouldn't believe. We may never discover gold or oil, but we give up all those mineral rights to individuals who retain those mineral rights no matter what. And so it may have been the first speaker that talked about how can we use gentrification to our advantage to create economic wealth and close that wealth gap. I don't know if that's the first speaker that could address it or any one of the speakers.
I can speak about this briefly in greater detail. Yeah, my reasoning on this, just from conducting extensive research on gentrification, is no one's going to want to stop it out. Cities don't want to stop the influx of wealth into their communities. So I don't know if that's necessarily the conversation we should have. If it's going to happen, how can we use it? I think there are many paths that could be done. So holding on to ownership as a way to accrue value, that's definitely one path. I mean, I think the most fundamental thing is making sure that Black people get to stay in these neighborhoods and benefit from this and make them feel like they're not going to get pushed out. Once we have those stopgaps in place, and that's where the state can definitely intervene in a useful way, then we can talk about how can these communities then gain the wealth that was deprived to them through government-backed deprivation for all these years.
Okay, thank you.
Member Monica Montgomery Stepp, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Moore. I also just want to thank all of our presenters for being here and for providing all of the extensive information that you have provided. I wanted to know, when we talk about gentrification, this idea of government intervention, helping Black people to obtain the power and land in their communities. Has there been any discussion around land granting, land trust? I know that there were, Dr. Gibbons, you had a couple of solutions. One was like low interest loans, but I'm wondering if any of you, I guess it could be open for any of you to answer, whether there has been any discussion on how we could make a reparation solution around land granting or public land trusts for African Americans.
I could start answering. I think one of the committee recommendations could be to create a bank that helps finance businesses, renters, and homeowners, and in the community. And I think also, an assistance of purchasing land and homes. I think that could be a real good recommendation.
If I may also add, I'm not aware of sort of policy discussions around land banking in the context of reparations, which doesn't necessarily mean that they haven't happened. But I do think it's a particularly creative and interesting policy instrument to think about using for a couple of reasons. One is that it does hold out the promise, potentially, if done right, of addressing the risk of displacement, not just to Black landowners, Black homeowners, Black business owners, but also to renters who don't own homes, who don't own businesses, who, of course, are very, very well represented in many of California's Black communities, and may be underserved by policy remedies that focus on compensation to the owners, to people who already have land, in other words. So I think that's interesting, and I also particularly think with respect to the question of gentrification, thinking about solutions that mitigate the risk of displacement, some kind of long-term, land banking or land trust solution that creates collective stability for a neighborhood may indeed be very, very helpful in mitigating the harms of displacement.
I concur with I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Dr. Gibbons. Go ahead.
Yes, I concur with Dr. Martin. I mean, about the importance of renters. This is a group that we really don't talk about enough. Granted, there have been some big state level pushes for things like rent control, but if there's any way that we could offer direct cash-based assistance to renters, especially in areas that see dramatic increases in rents, these are things that we can easily track with the data that we have. I don't know if it would take the form of a land trust or what that would exactly look like, but that's a group of people that we really must pay a lot of attention to. Thank you.
And I'd also add, we need to think about the nonprofit organizations that are sometimes renting space, and to lose them is losing part of your community. So I would add them as well.
Just another brief question is about the policing aspect that Dr. Appleyard brought up. The way I understood it was policing being used to kind of keep people in a certain space, and they're, basically police terror and violence on people, and discriminatory practices on people in that space. Any of you aware of the idea of kind of driving people out of spaces that are being gentrified in sort of a bad way, not as what we've discussed here today, but kind of driving people out as opposed to keeping them in certain spaces?
That's an interesting question. The research we were just starting on does show sort of an indication that there is sort of this cordon effect of police stops around the redlined areas. And I think that's an interesting research question to look at the actual, what police calls and things like that are happening in gentrified areas. Joe, Dr. Gibbons and I, Dr. Gibbons, we should be looking at that.
I'm aware of a little bit of research on the question. Also, there's a sociologist named, I believe, Brandon Beck, who's looked into this question with data from New York City. And has found some evidence that it distinguishes between police calls by neighbors who are gentrifying the neighborhood, who may be reaching out to the police to punish in effect their new neighbors, and police calls or in police stops that are preemptive, that are not initiated by people in the neighborhood. And if I recall correctly, he did find some evidence of increased police activity in neighborhoods basically adjacent to gentrifying areas, so in places that might be thought of as the next frontier of gentrification. Independent of any actions by the new residents, police themselves seems to be trying to, in effect, push people out. But that's the only study I'm aware of, and it's from a limited period of time in New York, and I think we need to know much more about how this works.
I've conducted some, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I've conducted research with fatal encounters data. This is an effort starting in 2000 to collect information on every police-related homicide that has happened up until present. And I've overlaid this information broken down by race on top of whether or not a neighborhood is gentrified. And what I have found is that gentrification predicts the increase of police-related homicides for people of color. The exact pathways as for why still needs to be unpacked. There's a number of theories that I can unpack, but with the limited amount of time, I would just like to stress that there is an association of police-related violence with gentrification specifically.
So we are a bit over time, so we are going to go to Member Holder and then close out with Vice Chair Brown. Member Holder, you're recognized.
Thank you. And I wanted to thank the presenters for such an enlightening presentation. You really just do an incredible job of encapsulating why so many of these 20th century policies around urban renewal that we've always viewed as race neutral are actually just as virulently racist, exclusionary, pernicious, and intentional as the type of Jim Crow segregation that we saw in the South. And I think it's really important to sort of uncover that dynamic about how these race neutral policies around infrastructure and urban renewal are really and were really just a form of Jim Crow segregation. That narrative is really important, especially to understand in the state of California, where a lot of people think, well, there was no Jim Crow segregation in California. There was, in the form of urban renewal and infrastructure planning that was virulently and intentionally racist. So thank you for connecting the dots on those issues. One of the things I wanted to ask about is, you've done an incredible job of giving us recommendations around, interventions that we need to think about. to make gentrification more sustainable and less racist, right? And really on concentrating on stabilizing historically Black neighborhoods and making sure that Black folks continue to have a stake in these neighborhoods as they gentrify. But the question I have is, Black folks weren't only sort of cordoned into these red. We were also excluded from affluent neighborhoods that had incredibly vibrant infrastructure, right? High-level education systems, excellent hospitals. We were, because of the dynamics that you've talked about, like the physical plan, we were physically excluded. And also intentionally excluded through policies like restrictive covenants from these more affluent neighborhoods. So my question is, assuming that integration is a good thing in the sense that it gives people greater access, right? What about plans to give Black people greater access to these affluent neighborhoods that they were historically excluded from? What about that perspective?
I think that's a really important perspective to take. I mean, school quality is a really important mover in many things, and I think that opening up new neighborhoods in the suburbs, which are now, with covenants and deeds and redline, and the FHA, restricting people to move out to folks. Now it's too expensive. I think and I grew up in Berkeley, and in a time of earnest integration. I'll say integration is a great thing. So we need to I think having funding and financing so people can move, and far be it for me to say people should live in the suburbs and have to drive everywhere. But I think these areas need to be opened up and made available to African American who've been robbed of the experiences you can get and the career advancing opportunities you can get in more affluent communities. I think it's a good thing to do. I think the commission should propose that these past harms be repaired.
If I may also respond, I think absolutely really robust civil rights enforcement to open up communities. There's still such pervasive discrimination in housing markets in California. Is absolutely critical. And in the absence of continued and improved civil rights enforcement, certainly reparations that were made could just be stolen again. And that, I think, is the nightmare scenario. So I concur. I also think the one very important sort of economic aspect of reparations that take the form of cash, right, is the freedom that they give to Black people to go where they will, and the way in which money reparations really kind of respect the freedom to purchase where one will, assuming again that civil rights protections are adequate to really give people that opportunity.
I would like to close by observing that one of the interesting consequences of gentrification is that this wealth is coming to these urban neighborhoods. This wealth that had been concentrated in the suburbs is moving with the gentrifiers into these communities, to where the East Bay has become a fabulously wealthy place in some parts due to gentrification. So you are getting integration becoming created. The script has been flipped. So it kind of turns me back to my observations from earlier. It's like, okay, so we're getting this integration happening, and we're seeing all these resources moving in these communities. So it's how do we make sure that Black residents are able to remain and feel like they have a stake in this? Because when we talk about integration, it's not enough to just open up communities. Decades of history to show the challenges that can come, but how do we ensure that all residents have an equal stake in these places? Integration is not helpful unless everyone has a similar sense of ownership and propriety on the communities that they move into. And I think that's where intervention from the state can help.
Thank you. So we're going to close out with Vice Chair Brown and be mindful that we have ran a bit over time. Thank you, Vice Chair Brown. You may proceed.
Madam Chair, members of the panel, and to our guests who have done an inexpressible job of stating the facts, you deserve great applause. And I would hasten to say that at the bottom, at the root of this whole question of whether or not we should and must receive reparations is the sin and the evil that Black folks have been devalued by this national government, the whole Atlantic slave trade, and wherever we have gone, whether it's being in the hood or going into suburbia, there's still in the minds of far too many who see us as being 3/5 human. As that Constitution said many years ago. The banks, yes, have redlined because we were of no value. The communities in which we lived, though we rightfully were there, acquired property, were devalued. The highways have displaced us. And the knowledge and the facts that you all have given represent an arsenal of justification as to why we should receive national, substantive, principle form of reparations. And my final question is, after you all have given us all this good information, this commission has distilled it, digested it, we have the task of having the will and enabling the body politic of this state to have the will to do something about it. Drinkwater, the great cleric, said a long time ago, knowledge we ask not, knowledge thou hast lent, but Lord, the will, there lies our bitter deed. Give us the bill above the deep, to do the deed, the deed. And I trust and hope that as we move forward with this task force, that we will be responsible, continue to be rational, but for God's sake, that the world know that what we're asking for is no more than for our humanity to be valued. To be valued. That's it. Are you going to value us as human beings who are deserving of the same rights and privileges as others get? Or are you going to make us feel that we should be penalized for asking for that which rightfully belongs to us? I want to shout over what I've heard this morning. You've given the evidence. And the governor, the assembly, every faith leader, and politician. We're waiting to see if they have enough humanity in them to see us as being a part of the human family.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Brown, for those closing words. Thank you again to our expert witnesses. Thank you, namely Dr. Gibbons, Dr. Appleyard, Professor Archer, and Dr. Isaac Martin. Really appreciate it. We will now reconvene at 12:30 p.m. to continue the rest of our agenda. Thank you again.
Hi, family. Oh, Lord, y'all. This is exhausting. It is traumatizing, but it is necessary that we continue to show up, to lean in.
Members, this is Aisha Martin Walton. I just wanted to remind you that during the break,
Hold on, guys.
that the recording will still be on. So if you have your audio on,
Okay, I put them on mute. Can y'all hear me? Let me know if I think you can hear me. I see my little avatar. I hope y'all can hear me. I put them on mute. They were still talking. The mics are remaining open. I want to thank each and every one of you for lending your energy to what's happening in California. It is epic. And we are really pushing hard to guarantee, thank you, Tansy, thank you, Danielle, thank you, everyone, to guarantee that this reparations proposal is not whack like Evanston, Illinois, which NARC and NCOBRA fully are in support of, and actually believe it should be some type of standard for the way we're repaired throughout the country. That would be an epic and flat out no. I show up while I'm at work in court. You guys are at work all over the country. And I know that you're tuning in as you can. And I thank you for keeping the chat going, especially my comrades who have been in this since the inception of the movement. Just back in 2019, we have been busy, and this is where we are. And I want you to understand that it's because you lean in, it's because you show up locally and nationally. It is because you march. It is because of all of your efforts. I want you to understand, comrades, it is not in vain. I know the road is tough, it's stressful, full of anxiety. The movement takes cat naps. We're all operating on fumes. But God has chosen each and every one of us, family, to quarterback this all the way to victory, all the way to the touchdown. This is on us. You have been handpicked, family, to make this happen for our lineage. And this is the work. And so as exhausting and traumatizing as this information is, I mean, the more you know, the more you find out you don't know. It is exhausting to hear the atrocities by the government at every branch to extinct us. This is genocide, family. This has been genocidal since our emancipation, since they could no longer use us as the shoes, since our Black soldiers, our freedmen fought for our civil rights and won our emancipation because they won the war for the Union. They beat the Confederates. Okay? And so this is the history that they want to hide from freedmen and immigrants and white folks alike. We are their reparations. Hi, Miss Powell. Hi, y'all. I'm going to scroll up and give y'all some love before I go take a ladies' room break and maybe try to get something to eat. I have such a throbbing headache from all the information I just took in. Well, like I said in the chat, it is no different than what I work feverishly to impart to you here at the Reparationist Perspective. I had to cram my words in 3 minutes. I'm surprised they didn't cut off my mic. I'm surprised they let me in first. So do know this, family. If y'all find y'all show up tomorrow and y'all don't hear them call my name, it is because they don't want me to speak. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop every time we show up here. Sometimes in the past, I think they heard my comments at the top. Shout out to those of you who were the early birds, got the early bird special, because I lit the joint up. Because if I can't sleep, nobody can sleep. That's how this gonna work. If I can't sleep, nobody will sleep. So I usually come on there with my firebrand, with my angry Black woman. I don't give a damn what they call me. They call me so many names. I told my other org that I work with, I'm callous right now. I don't, it rolls off my back like water off a duck, because what they want us to do, free men, women, and children, what they want us to do is keep everybody on the tit and not have the energy for the fight for freedmen. This is what they want, while flattening Blackness and legislating us to the bottom of this Titanic as the anchor, as the bottom cast of this country's capitalism. And that's not how any of this is going to work as long as me and my comrades have breath. I don't give a damn what you call me. I don't give a damn if you trolling me. I don't give a damn if you're censoring me. I don't give a damn if you shutting down my pages. I will speak on this until the victory is won, because our very lineage depends on us, family. We are the chosen ones. The ancestors keep you awake like they keep me awake. And when I look into my daughter's eyes, I know that I've got the strength to carry on with each and every one of you that show up and give me love on the reparationist perspective. Each and every one of you that patronize the reparationist perspective. You don't know what you mean to me. You don't know what it means to hear that you value my voice in this space, that you're done with the respectability politics because it's killing our people. It is lining us up in the gas chamber, and they want us to just be silent, and I refuse to be silent as they extinct my people to as few in numbers as the Indians. Not on my watch. And not on the comrades' watch. This is not a personality contest. Everybody off the tit. It's freedmen liberation and reparation time. So, I know I'm not very popular. I know people wish they could muzzle me or worse. But I'm here to stay. Because God has chosen me and he has chosen you. And so, yes, take your breaks when you can. I don't get a break. I don't even think my comrades who say, oh, let's take a hiatus. They don't take hiatuses. They still working, y'all. They are working as this country and the Biden administration, whom 87% of our electorate put into office, continue their benign neglect of freedmen. Not on my watch. Not on my comrades' watch. So I thank you for being here. I want y'all to go get you some lunch, because I'm back at 12:30. And know that I'm not always able to chat because I'm in court at the same time on my job. So I'm back and forth. So if you don't see me in the chat, y'all carry on. I'll catch up with you. When I get breaks between courts. Let me shout out my people who were here, because I love y'all so much. I can't see you if you in Facebook. I can't see you on the Twitter, but I feel your energy. Kelly Pryor. Thank you, sis. BB Rodriguez. MT Airy 007. Who else was over here chatting it up? Means Aptara. Okay, I think they heard my comments. Tansy Flakes. I love you, fam. Miss Powell. You know you my heart. Tanya Princess Jones, my sister from another mister. On call, Brother 83, I see you, fam. Trayvon Mitchell, I see you, fam. GOJ, you've been cutting up in the chat, and I'm grateful for your comments. Did I get everybody that I can see? Oh, Lord. United States Atlantic Creole Nationalist Party, thank you for being on the live and chatting and sharing. Oh, y'all make the show rich. Let's see here. Who else I got? I think, okay. I think I got Danielle Witten. I see you, family. T Digital Group Productions. I see you, fam. I don't know who. Adamas Bax Yexwa. Oh, I don't know. See, that could be a troll. But welcome to the live. Oh, let's see here. Who else? Did I get everybody? Did I get everybody? Yes, I love you too, sis. Black and strong. I love all y'all. Now listen, if you don't come back, know that the light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us. Wherever Freedmen and its allies are, God truly is. Because family, guess what? You are the face of God. You are the voice of God. You are the body temple of the Spirit of the living God. I'll see you back, family. 12:30 for those of you who can hang for the next half. Got some great speakers coming your way. Let me close us out with this beautiful outro, and I'll see you back at 12:30. Family, are we getting this done? Make no mistake about it, it's going to get done.